When I was a child, I wanted to be an astronaut, and it was a very fierce ambition of mine. And I think it stemmed from my sense of adventure, my sense that there was a big world out there and we didn't know enough about it, and I wanted to know more and play my part. I was good at what we now call the STEM subjects, so physics and maths and chemistry, and I had a sort of fearlessness about me, and I thought I'd like to be an astronaut. But at school, although my teachers were very encouraging and they saw something in me, I was told that the chances of becoming an astronaut, getting onto NASA's space program, were not high. When we were studying for A-levels at my state comprehensive school in the centre of Leeds, we had to spend one afternoon a week doing community service. And some people went to help younger children in schools or in an old people's home to talk to the people living there. But I was sent to a law centre because I spoke Asian languages and I'd been used to translating for my parents from being very young. They needed somebody who could translate for some of their clients. And so I would do that. And I saw how law could solve problems for people, real problems that mattered. So tenants who had unfair landlords, or people who'd been working and their employer had dismissed them unfairly, or children excluded from schools, those kinds of real practical problems. And these things transformed people's lives. I was amazed. When I was a little girl, we were very poor, and we lived in a back-to-back house in Leeds. And my dad and my mum worked incredibly hard. My dad in a foundry, my mother as a sewing machinist, and the concept of being a lawyer was as far away from them as the moon. My father's family were a farming family from the Punjab in India. My mother's family was a little bit higher up the social order, and her uncles were doctors and in the Indian Army. She was sent from the Punjab to England when she was very young, and my parents got married in the front room of a relative's house in Derby in the Midlands, because there were no Sikh temples in the area at that time in the early 60s. And it was a typical Indian marriage in that everyone looks very glum, but a new chapter in their lives was beginning. They thought the opposite of injustice was prosperity, and I don't agree with that. The opposite of poverty is justice. And my parents came from a position of poverty in this country. They worked really hard and eventually accumulated enough savings to buy a small corner shop. And to them, that was escaping from poverty. It was the pinnacle of their achievement. And although they suffered terrible problems there was a lot of racism, a lot of unhappiness in the community, I knew that that wasn't the only answer. And as long as you have enough for your bed and board, actually our lives are for more than just surviving and accumulating money. I just knew that deep inside. There have been several moments when I've thought, gosh, something special has happened. I think the first one of those was when I was instructed as junior counsel in an intellectual property fraud, and my leader, who was an excellent advocate, had to withdraw just before the trial began, a few weeks before. And I was asked, and this was a great sign of respect, I was asked to step up and take over leading in this 8-month fraud trial with Silks on the other side. I was a junior barrister, and I thought about it for a split second, and then I said, yes, of course, I'll do it. And that really raised my profile. I think one of the difficulties that people who are from a different social class, like me, or a different sex, or a different ethnicity, or even all three, face is that perception gap that clerks and instructing solicitors will sometimes have. And that will mean that whereas my colleagues, my peers who were in pupillage with me or young tenants like me in good criminal sets will automatically make the next step at the right time, whereas someone like me might have to work much harder and go and ask and point out that it's time for me to move on to the next stage. And I think we have to have the courage to have those conversations, and we have to be willing to have confidence in ourselves and to know when the time is right and not draw back, because pushing against stereotypes requires courage. The team is used to prosecute the most serious criminal cases in the country. And so all the big difficult terrorist cases, all the serious murder trials, all the high-profile public cases, phone hacking, cash for honours, all of these things are dealt with by Treasury Counsel. We also advised on all the security service matters that came up where there's a criminal element, extradition cases, international corruption, things like that. And it was a thrilling team to be part of. Standing in court number 1 at the Old Bailey, getting ready to open a murder trial in which the press and the public are rightly interested, has to be one of the most exciting things to do on this planet. I advised on corruption cases in European banks. I was also able to stretch the law when there was a change to the Public Order Act so that it was possible to prosecute people for inciting hatred on the grounds of sexual orientation. I was asked to take the first prosecution of a group of Muslim men who had distributed dreadful leaflets calling for the murder of gay people. And that was a very sensitive and high-profile case, but it was wonderful to do it, to see the law progressing in a way that recognised the rights of people who had been shamed for so long. But I think the area in which I was really able to bring something unique was the area of honour crime. And I was instructed in a series of cases to prosecute, often cold cases, so where young women or men had disappeared years ago. When I was at university, I met my husband, Russell, who is an artist, and he had a first-class honours degree in fine art. But when I met him, he'd given up painting, and he was working with a church in Soho and setting up a charity called the Greenlight Project. And I was fascinated by this incredibly intelligent and compassionate man who would give up everything to serve the poor. And I had become a Christian when I was a teenager, and it had led to some estrangement with my parents. Our estrangement grew greater after I got married to somebody who wasn't a Sikh and who wasn't Indian. But when we were able to have children, we had promised each other that one of us would stop work and would be at home with them to give them our attention and love in a real practical way. And I always thought it would be me that would stop. But as it happened, he volunteered to stop, and I carried on with my career. I would try and be as astute and focused and give all my attention to my work. I didn't have any photographs of my family on my desk. And then as soon as I walked through that front door at night, it would all fall away, and I would roll around on the carpet with the babies and be completely there for them and for my husband. One of my proudest moments was when I was appointed to Queen's Counsel. It was a great honour, and the particular magic of it for me was that all of my family were involved. Although my parents were invited and didn't come, my husband and my children came, and they were old enough to understand that it was a great honour. I felt such an obligation to my parents because of the hard work they'd put in to bring us up and the struggles they'd had. And it was very painful to not be able to share with them the good things that were happening in my life. my marriage, the birth of our children, how gloriously wonderful they were, and their accomplishments. But I kept sending them photographs, I would contact them, and although when I became Treasury Counsel, when I became a Silk, these milestones were rebuffed. It's wonderful to be part of what I see as a tide rising of many able women and people who are a little bit different, reaching the heights of the legal system that we have in this country. And I'm delighted to take my place with them. There's a lot of progress to be made still, and we have to be vigilant to make sure we don't step backwards, because there are pressures in all directions, and we have to be able to encourage the brightest and the best to seek judicial office. For me, it was a pinnacle. I can't say it was an ambition from the start, because as I say, I'm really just a failed astronaut. One of the things that my mother really enjoyed doing was going to the Old Bailey with me in the summer months to see a portrait of me that's hanging at the Old Bailey. And although, like most people, I feel rather embarrassed about having a portrait of me hanging anywhere where other people can see it, I could see that she was very moved by seeing it, and moved by the obvious high regard in which I was held.